Hello, I'm Rebecca Steinmann, and I lead the Project Management Office for SLB New Energy's Industrial Decarbonization. Over the past several decades, SLB has been involved in many CCS projects. We field a lot of questions from clients trying to navigate the challenge of the complex environment between regulations, government incentives, financing, and insurance, not to mention the technical and economic feasibility of these projects. So we're here today to dig into some of the details with one of our CCS planning experts, Richard Seltzer.
Thanks very much, Rebecca.
One high-level constant we see everywhere is that the standard phases and foundational elements that we look at and that we work through as we characterize and evaluate a site, they remain the same. As we look to take the CO2 complex and design an MMV plan, can you walk me through some of the key elements and considerations that you recommend to folks who are looking to develop carbon storage sites?
I'd like to address first the inputs that go into building that initial conceptual MMV plan. We've got a site that's been selected through a screening and ranking process. We then go through a site characterization, and as we then start to run different scenarios, we'll build an injection plan, a field development strategy. And that's the most critical input to the MMV plan because that tells us what we're going to monitor in the subsurface. But then there's other really key components to this, right? So we need to understand what the potential risks are that are associated with a complex. So we'll go through a whole risk assessment process. Absolute criticality is, of course, the regulatory compliance, and then of course the economics piece is the other part that goes into that. So those are the things that go into that box we call MMV plan, and that's our starting point. The other piece I would mention is this is very much an evergreen living piece, right? It's something that will last throughout the entirety of the project lifecycle and into the post-injection process as well.
When it comes to the variety of projects we see globally, I would imagine that we have site-specific sets of risks and regulations. Can you share some of your experience with the different approaches you've seen across the world?
We deal with so many different environments across different geographies with those different regulations. One day we might be looking at, saline aquifer. The following day it could be a depleted oil and gas reservoir. We look at different reservoir types, sandstones, carbonates, even basalts. It gives this whole sort of variety, but then you have to have a very clear systematic process for sort of dealing with that, right? When we think about not only those elements, the subsurface pieces, but we also have to take into account those regulatory pieces. So for EPA, for example, focus on protection of underground sources of drinking water. Seismicity is very important. In the EU, you also have like a credit mechanism where importers into the EU, what we call the carbon border adjustment mechanisms, have to demonstrate that they're decarbonizing their products to be able to get reductions on tariffs or whatever that apply to that. So we're dealing with these different pieces. It's just about having a process that walks us all the way through that.
Speaking of the different approaches by country and regulators and site-specific risks, what are some of the best practices to identify and manage the risks throughout the course of the MMV planning and design?
We'll bring lots of different stakeholders together. So this could be financial, legal, economic people from within the storage developer. And it's very much a brainstorming exercise. We'll divide people up into groups so that we have different viewpoints, and we'll go through exercises, writing ideas up on the walls. From there, we'll really go through how likely in this given project is something to happen, and if it did, what is the level of severity that would be associated with that. So from there, we can start to really drill down into the primary risks that we would be concerned at, either technical or economic risks.
So you essentially move from qualitative risk analysis into quantitative risk analysis.
Yeah, so at this point it would be pretty qualitative because it's groupthink. That might be faulting, or it might be the presence of a number of legacy wells, or it might be some surface features that are problematic. If you're shallow water offshore, maybe it's you're concerned about hurricanes coming through.
Right.
So there's different pieces that we'll look at. Where we move to the quantitative piece of this is to go back to the modeling piece, which for us is critical. This again carries through the life cycle of the project. We'll take our flow simulation, our stress simulations, so the geomechanics and the reservoir piece, and couple those together so that we can actually predict what some of these risks would look like as you progress through your injection plan. So we can run many ensembles of models, and that might help to tell us, this particular fault is at danger of reactivating if you have these particular scenarios, right? So,
right.
Or we might start to see some issues with the cat rock integrity or something like this. So these are areas that we can take from modeling and really quantify. I've run 100 models. A risk only really occurs in one or two of those. So obviously that drops us way down in terms of risk profile. Conversely, if it comes out many times in the modeling, then something we need to address and mitigate.
So is the risk analysis only relevant during the early and planning stages, or is it fair to say that you could carry it through and optimize the site performance factors of injectivity, capacity, or containment throughout the entire life cycle?
Absolutely. Once we're actually in an injection piece, that MMV plan that we put in place give us our initial idea of where we need to take our measurements, what the monitoring program looks like. But things change, right? We're talking geology. It's not a perfect science, right?
They call it a model for a reason. Right?
Exactly, right? So subsurface uncertainty always exists. So things will change. There'll be surprises as we go. And that's where, that quantitative approach, conformance to our model, becomes really, really important. So yeah, absolutely, this runs the entire life cycle.
So when it comes to the MMV planning, how do we select the measurements that are most effective to mitigate the risks and at the same time are designed to improve cost efficiency?
And again, this is where we talk about some of that uniqueness, if you like, and the different environments that we deal with. And there are certain measurements that you'll see applied to most projects. Downhole fiber, for example, acoustic and temperature fiber. These are very valuable for monitoring in most environments, right? But you'll then see other types of technologies, such as satellite imagery, which is really applicable only in a land type environment. You can't get anything from that data in the offshore. And conversely, there's seabed monitoring techniques, deployments of ROVs, etc., that is obviously an offshore applicability, not onshore. So there's certain measurements that also make more sense to apply in a depleted oil and gas type of situation versus a saline aquifer. So we go through a systematic process of assessing, is this measurement going to be applicable for this project, and is it detectable? And then, of course, the other piece you touched on is the cost. So we are here to make sure that we're the most cost-efficient program. We are mapping everything that needs to be mapped. It meets all the regulatory compliance criteria and gives us the confidence in the integrity of the storage complex, again, throughout the life cycle.
I see. So through the process of evaluating the most suitable measurements, you're basically able to identify the most impactful design changes to do optimization of the cost.
I'll give you one quick example here. We built like a pie chart of costs for a conceptual hub in an environment like US land. And what we saw from that is about a quarter of the operating expenditure relates to measurements. And then you have episodic and continuous measurements. In turn, about 3/4 of that goes into the spend on fiber optics or spatial measurements, things like 3D seismic or VSPs, etc. Right? So these are the areas that we really feel we can address with new innovative technologies to bring down the cost profile and make the whole thing much more economic.
This has been a really insightful discussion. You've given so many great examples of how proper MMV planning can help not only to optimize costs and ensure compliance, but also to simplify complexity. Thank you so much, Richard.
Thanks very much, Rebecca.